Amy and her boyfriend Jason had been planning a camping trip for weeks. They found an isolated spot deep in the woods, far from the noise of the city. It was a perfect getaway, no distractions, just them, a tent, and the tranquility of nature. They arrived in the late afternoon, set up their tent, gathered some firewood, and settled in for a peaceful evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows between the trees, they sat around the campfire, enjoying the warmth and the crackling sound of the flames. It was peaceful until they heard the first strange noise. It was faint at first, almost like a distant cry. Jason cocked his head, trying to discern what it was, but Amy shrugged it off as a bird or an animal. However, the sound grew louder, becoming eerily clear. It wasn't an animal, it was a baby's cry. Amy felt a chill run down her spine. They were miles away from any houses or roads, and the idea of a baby being out in the wilderness made no sense. Jason stood up, his brow furrowed with concern. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice uneasy. Amy nodded, her heart beating faster. "It's probably a deer or something," she said, trying to dismiss her own fear, but Jason wasn't convinced. He grabbed his flashlight and stood up. "I'm going to check it out." "Stay here." Jason, no, Amy protested, but he was already moving toward the sound, disappearing into the darkness. The fire cast flickering shadows on the trees as Amy watched his light fade into the distance. The crying continued, louder now, echoing through the woods. She hugged herself, listening to the sound fade, then silence. Minutes passed. Jason didn't return. Amy's heart raced. She called his name, but there was no response, just the crackling of the fire and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Anxiety gripped her. What if he was hurt? What if there really was a baby out there in need? She grabbed her own flashlight and stood at the edge of the camp, listening. The crying had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. "Jason," she called out, her voice shaking. Suddenly she heard footsteps approaching. Relief washed over her. Jason was coming back. But when she saw him step into the circle of light, her relief turned to horror. Jason was standing there, but something was wrong. His face was twisted into a grotesque grin, his eyes wide and vacant. Blood dripped from his mouth, staining his shirt. His hands hung limp at his sides, but his body twitched unnaturally. Amy's breath caught in her throat. "Jason," she whispered, taking a step back. He didn't respond, didn't blink. He simply stared at her with that awful grin, blood seeping from his lips. Then, from behind him, Amy heard it again, a soft, pitiful wail. It was the cry of a baby. A chill ran down her spine as she realized the sound wasn't coming from him. Slowly, out of the shadows behind Jason, something else emerged, a creature, hunched and pale, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It mimicked the sound of a baby crying. But its mouth was wrong, twisted in an unnatural way, as if it had practiced the sound 1,000 times but could never get it quite right. Amy felt the world spin as terror overtook her. Jason, if it even was Jason anymore, began to move towards her with jerky, unnatural steps. She backed away, but her legs felt like they were made of lead. The last thing Amy heard was the creature's pitiful mimicry of a baby's wail, echoing through the trees as the fire flickered and died, leaving her alone in the dark. The end. PLZ. Subscribe my channel to watch more videos.